I would now like to introduce today's presenter. Yugal Joshi is Everest Group's business leader for technology services, research, and advisory memberships, which include multiple programs such as applications, cloud services, digital, and platforms. Titus M is a practice director and leads Everest Group's cloud and infrastructure services. Research practice focusing on network services and 5G. And with that, I'd like to turn things over to Yugal.
Hey, thank you very much. And thanks again for joining this session with us, wherever you are joining from. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening as well. And we are very excited to do this session specific to the APAC market. So if we move on, I think we already introduced ourselves, so we won't waste much time. Go ahead. You know, when we started to think about this, some of the people questioned us, okay, why are you doing this session? Because, you know, cloud adoption in APAC is not new. It's been going on for quite some time now. So what has changed? What is the trigger to do this session? So I think we are going to answer it in two broad ways. One is we will understand what is happening in the APAC cloud services market as of today, how it has evolved over a period of time. And then we will also talk about what is changing. Why is there a need to restructure cloud adoption strategy by enterprises? So what are some of the key trends? What enterprises are expecting from cloud service provider and professional service providers, helping them adopt cloud services? And then, of course, what are the emerging trends in this market? Moving on. Okay. So I think it's not a secret to say that APAC in general as a region is holding up well, even in these turbulent times. We are seeing what is happening in global economy in general. A lot of the markets are under pressure. So if you see the consumer sentiment, as well as, you know, an expectation of, okay, how do they look to their future, is generally brighter in the APAC market than some of the Western markets. Be it the expectation of economic slowdown, which is probably the lowest, or expectations of high inflation, which directly impacts consumer sentiment. So then, you know, and of course, you know, neither me or Titus are economists, but we do realize why some of these things are happening. The region is very diverse, which means the way their economy work is very different from global economy. Significantly strong domestic demand, and then economic policies have been good. So some of these things, you know, help APAC become the market which it is today. And that's the reason, if you see on this page, we are forecasting that this market is going to grow faster than other regions in the world. Go ahead. Having said that, I think it will be incorrect to say that the APAC market isn't going to get impacted from what is happening in the world. We do see some deceleration may take place. I think it is still iffy, but the growth rates are generally higher than the global averages. And I think next couple of years, where you know, a lot of spend hesitation has started to come globally, as well as in the APAC market. So a lot of the APAC countries are going through their own political changes. They are changing their laws in which they engage with technology companies. So some of those things are happening. I think there's a reasonable cloud over cloud services in that sense, that some of these policies need to be set. But in general, broadly, we do expect all the regions within APAC to grow faster than generally grow faster than the global average. So moving on, and the reason, as we said, right? Yes, they are different regions are very different. If you go ahead, one thing which probably differentiates this region in addition to other things is the significant impact that SMB and startups have. In fact, as we speak, there is one large cloud vendor who is doing a startup event as we speak with you, because startups are so important. Second is, a lot of these markets, especially India, have become delivery centers for global organizations. So the natural talent development is extremely strong, which gives this region an edge. So some of these trends are around specific enterprises. The enterprises in, let's say, ANZ and Japan are very different from enterprises in, let's say, India or some other countries. So the level of maturity in itself is different. And what we have seen increasingly now is that as APAC enterprises have started to increase their cloud adoption, started to become a little more mature in the way they are adopting cloud, they are increasingly engaging with third-party technology service providers to help them in their cloud journey, not just to migrate, but bring value out of their cloud adoption, use cloud as a transformation platform. And that's where I think there's a very interesting spaghetti that is being formed, where on one side you have enterprises, you have all the policies which the regulators are creating, then you have the technology service provider, and then you have cloud vendors, and of course the ISVs, the software vendors. All of them are doing their own bit. But at the end of the day, I think the market is holding up well, irrespective of course, some of the challenges that we talked about. So if we move on, let's just ask you, have a quick poll here around, given the fact that some of you would have adopted cloud for some time now, do you believe, and how optimistic are you around cloud helping you achieve your business objectives in the future? We'll give the poll some time and then we will move on. Okay. Yeah, so I think, Titus, why don't I ask you about, what do you say about, a lot of people are optimistic. Having said that, it's an interesting thing to see that almost 1/3 of the people voted that they are neutral. And I think this is very different from a few years ago when everybody thought cloud services are going to be panacea of everything that they are going to do.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the response, and just a couple of years back, everyone was highly optimistic about cloud adoption. And they were like, this is going to break my cloud, my business itself, and it's going to be the next big thing. But what really has happened in the last 2 years is there were accelerated adoption without proper planning. And that kind of now reflecting in some of the results that are coming in terms of cloud adoption, and they're not really seeing enough value out of what's coming out of cloud. And that seems to be a key point across APAC. We're having a lot of questions coming in from enterprises. Here, I moved to cloud last 5 years, but I'm not getting the operational efficiency that I expected it to give.
Well, absolutely.
Let alone
in fact, yeah, and in fact, I think 2 days before we were having a conversation with the CTO based out of Singapore. And then he said something very similar. In fact, he went on to say that, what, in the hustle of adopting cloud, we as in when he said he meant the industry, did not really take much care of the contracts around the way some of our cloud contracts are structured. And now, after a couple of years, especially fueled by pandemic, we are relooking some of those, because one of the thing is, yes, we might have been little bit hasty in adopting cloud, but at the same time, a lot of them say that the way cloud vendors have structured their contracts are mostly one-sided, and there is a that's where I think some of the insights, some of the, if I may say, grudges also coming. Okay, how can we use whatever we have rather than continue to spend on cloud? How can I optimize my cloud spend, and then how can I get more value out of what I have already committed? Which very interestingly, despite the fact that APAC, as we discussed, is a reasonably different market from Western world, this is very similar to what we see globally. So in a way, it is good. It's a good pattern that APAC enterprises are learning from other peers outside of their immediate region. So if we move ahead, so Titus did touch upon this, right? How things have evolved over a period of time, and how do we see them going forward? So in our research, when we interviewed, I think over 60 enterprises, and then asked them, okay, from a cloud perspective, what do you think in the APAC market? What do you want from it, right? What are your priorities? So of course, the cost efficiencies, cost optimization was number one. Not very surprising. Business resilience was also very important. And I think the interesting thing is everybody wants cloud to play a significant and a pivotal role in enabling all of these. And that's the reason from 2020, before, just before we were entering the pandemic, from a modernization of my technology landscape to now, what we discuss, and then going forward, okay, I have invested enough, but let's get to a value realization discussion. And each enterprise is defining value in their own way. Yes, the ROI part is one, the cost optimization part is another, productivity and so on. But then they may have their own way of defining value. What do they expect from cloud services? And then keeping a reasonably flexible architecture that will allow them to leverage next generation cloud services as well. And I think, as you see, the entire aspect of sovereignty and data security has become so important across all the countries within APAC. They are also thinking about, okay, how can cloud enhance our security posture? And that's the reason we see a lot of the cloud vendors opening local regions in APAC. They have really accelerated their investments in the APAC market. In fact, I think a few days back, one of the largest cloud vendor also said that they are increasing their investments in India. So I think much like their Western counterpart, the expectation for cloud is evolving, which to people like us is a very good news. Because generally we had seen, APAC enterprises would work in their own cocoon, almost like frog in a well, without really getting to know, okay, what is happening outside their market. But now, a lot of their expectations, a lot of their priorities are even superseding what some of their Western enterprise peers may be expecting out of cloud, which is a very good sign, because this market, given its diversity and complexity, needs different kind of solution. Moving on, as we discussed that. Yeah, Titus, go ahead.
One question which I just got. So how come talent management is number 5? Because a couple of years back, and I also remember talent management used to be at least in the top 3. What has changed that now it's number 5, even though it's still a relevant issue? But what do you see has changed?
So I think, see, one is, of course, these are relative priorities. Now, what has happened over a period of time, the talent market has cooled down. We saw that number of, the attrition rates across enterprise technology as well as supply side has gone down. People have realized that pandemic fueled nonsense of, buying talent at 100% premium was not sustainable. So the buy and supply, both the talent, the individual and the companies have become more mature, and they have realized that, okay, this is not how the industry is going to work. So that's where attrition rates have cooled down. Second is, I think a lot of the companies have started to put a lot of effort in retaining their talent as well, around, the policies that are there. You might have seen, as the pandemic started to recede, a lot of the companies jumped onto the bandwagon that, okay, let's bring our people to office. But then they quickly realized that's not going to work. So now almost everyone has settled into a hybrid work model. So there are multiple of such, but you are right. I don't think talent has gone away as a challenge. I think it is going to be, especially the speed at which the cloud vendors keep innovating and adding services. It is very difficult for anyone to keep pace, which means they need the next generation and top-notch talent to do well and to use cloud in a strategic manner. But that's a good question. And I think we were talking about different regions here. About okay, how let's say Japan is different from maybe ASEAN countries and so on. But this is very well known, by the way. I don't think there is anything very different here. People know that APAC market in general is a heterogeneous market, different type of countries in different growth phase, where there are from a maturity perspective, technology perspective, and then all of this influences the way they adopt cloud services. And this influences the way they work with cloud service providers, both on the tech side as well as on the professional services side, which means either it's a cloud technology vendor, the platform providers, or the professional service providers, the technology and consulting companies. They need to align their offerings based on these markets. And we have seen one of the ways companies do it, or the supply side do it, is they prioritize some of these regions. So not everyone may be present across all. In fact, recently you might have seen one of the very large technology consulting provider merge their South Korea and Japan business with ANZ to create one business unit, one global business line earlier, whereas South Korea and Japan were kept separate. So I think different type of supply side at least is trying to address this heterogeneity problem in a different manner. I don't think this heterogeneity is going away. So those unique demand challenges, those unique supply challenges are going to persist. So it will be up to both the enterprise as well as cloud platform providers and technology consulting providers to come to a consensus of, okay, how do they go from here? Moving on, this is a very interesting page. So Titus, I know we got a question in the pre-webinar launch, that which industries are adopting cloud faster, and then which are the most cloud ready, least cloud ready market. Anything from your side?
Yeah. So there are two ways to look at it. So I'm going to talk it from a readiness point of view. So if I look at from a workload that can be moved to cloud, then I would put telecom right at the top. And the way we see it, we close to even 50% of the workloads can be moved to cloud. And that is what we are seeing in terms of adoption as well. And obviously the financial services has always been a mature industry in terms of technology adoption, and they've been early adopters. But one of the major changes with cloud that's happening is a lot of telecom, even some of the technology companies are also adopting cloud at a faster pace, and the percentage of workloads that moving to cloud, there's an increased percentage of workloads of telecom moving to cloud compared to even some of the financial services, where the percentage is somewhere in the 20 to 25% of workloads only moving to cloud. That's an interesting take, because we have already hit the numbers in terms of which industry contributes most to the economy or to the providers. But this, in terms of how mature industry is, it's primarily the telecom that's kind of showing being the front runner in terms of what they're adopting.
Very interesting. And I think, much like, again, the adoption of multi and hybrid cloud is dominating, which doesn't come as a surprise because of the fragmentation and the difference of the market, but a global trend as well. And then the leading cloud vendors, the AWS and Azure, continue to form from bulk of this market from a spend perspective. So that's very interesting. Now let's just ask our audience once more. Let's run a short poll. Moving on. Around, irrespective of how you define value, right? You can define it the way you want, but given what's the current macroeconomic environment, what's your take on the value conversations when it comes to cloud?
Yugal, I really like the fourth option. I'm not sure what value is for me. That is also a conversation I'm getting a lot into in terms of the question is, how do I measure value? And is it the right way to do it? Are KPIs good? Are some of the SLAs good? So there are a lot of conversation in terms of, is that the right way to measure value? But I'm just waiting for some of the responses and we can further discuss about that.
Yeah, so I think of course quarter of the people agree with you. Defining value is in itself a challenge, but at the same time, I don't think anybody will say, of course, not important. I think that was expected, but then half of them are saying it's extremely important. So a lot of it is aligned to what we hear in the market, what our research shows. But that point around defining value based on who you are is very important. Some of the things that we say, if you move on right around, what are some of the value drivers? So for that matter, so going ahead, some of these influence. Okay, security could be a value driver for me. My legacy, what should I do with it? Having said that, we also heard from people, that are we seeing or do we see repatriation from cloud, going back to on premises or something? Now, if I may add something, and then I'll ask Titus you to jump in, is in our recent enterprise pulse research, where we interviewed over 700 clients, including in APAC, we realized that APAC satisfaction with their professional service provider for cloud services was at the lowest. It was 61% compared to, let's say, 74% in North America. So, which is a big delta, that okay, almost like 40% of enterprises said we are not satisfied with the value we receive from our cloud investment and from our technology and consulting service providers. That may drive some of these discussions around repatriation or called reverse migration. But Titus, do you see that happening, or is it mostly in people's head?
So if it's going to be a trend, the short answer is no. It's not going to be a trend where we're going to see people, after moving to both public cloud or private cloud, moving back to on-prem. That is not going to happen. What is going to happen is it falls back to the question around, have you defined your value correctly? And the planning around how cloud adoption happens, that did not happen properly in the last 2 years. People just went ahead, hey, everyone is doing cloud, let me also do cloud. And that kind of what happened was, then people did not align their workloads, the right workloads to the right cloud. And that still persists. And if you see some of the case studies or use cases that people are talking about in terms of repatriation, they are very data or storage specific workloads. We saw the examples of Dropbox. We saw the example of another SaaS company. If you see the workloads that they've moved back on-prem, these are primarily storage related workloads. And that is going to stay the same. A storage related workload where you can estimate the capacity that's going to be required for your next 10 years. You don't need a cloud which is more dynamic, where it's more agile. You don't need it for that storage. But for workloads that need to be more dynamic, the cloud is going to exist. And this is something I always like in terms of technology. There's always a place for everything. There is always going to be a place for mainframe in our world. There's going to be a place for on-prem data center in this world. There's going to be a place for private cloud in this world. And there's going to be a place for public cloud. And that is going to stay the same. And I think APAC market has kind of understood that slightly early. And that's why we see a lot more need for multi and hybrid cloud approach. And that's very interesting in terms of APAC, because we see the North America and Europe now only getting onto that bandwagon, where initially they were public cloud first focus, and now they're thinking about, okay, that's not the right way to go about it. I think I need to have everything in my environment.
Yeah. So, if I have to summarize what you say, there's a surely a rethink of enterprise architecture, the tech architecture, and the clients are going to take pick and choose. Okay, what should I run where? And now there's so many options. Unlike earlier times when it was dominated by the public cloud hyperscalers, now you have a lot more technologies to choose from. So they will have a relook and then see, okay, where they would want to run what. But you are right. I think cloud adoption is a unidirectional journey, so there won't be a reverse migration per se in terms of patterns, but there will be instances where enterprises are rethinking where they need to run their workload. Moving on.
Yeah. So thanks, Yugal, for setting things up. So when you were listing down some of these challenges, I was just trying to put them into buckets. And four interesting buckets came up. One is technology, the second being cost, the third being security, and the fourth being cultural and regulatory nuances. And if I see these four pillars, these are fundamentally four pillars of a good IT or a business strategy in itself. If these are the challenges that APAC enterprises are facing, then it kind of gives me a thought that that's why we are having this session, that fundamentally your approach to cloud needs a restructuring. Your cloud strategy needs a slight bit of tweaking in terms of how you're going. And it's not a technology conversation. You need to have all these four pillars together. And that's what we're going to talk about in this section in terms of why APAC enterprises need to rethink their cloud strategy. How do you address these four pillars in terms of technology, cost, security, and the regional and regulatory nuances? And we'll talk about the how as well in terms of how do you need to do that. Moving on. So in terms of mapping it to the four pillars that I was talking about. So first, in terms of technology, what we have noticed in a lot of APAC enterprises is there's still a lot of legacy mindset that's still embedded in the way they operate, the way they think about technology. And there's a lot of, they're looking for primarily cost efficiency, but not really looking at a business priority lens. That's kind of missing out right now. And the second, mapping to the cost. There are two elements when we talk about cloud. Erstwhile, when data centers were the big thing, it used to be only about setting up data center and the operational cost was not that significant. But in cloud, given its dynamic nature, there is a cost associated with moving to the cloud. But even more important is how do you manage cost in the cloud? And we'll talk about these in details as we go ahead. And the third is one of the biggest challenges, and we'll talk about some of the numbers in this upcoming slides, is the biggest challenge APAC enterprises have in the interviews that they've quoted is cloud really secure? And we'll talk about how cloud is not just secure, it can be your enabler of everything secure that you were thinking about, and can be more secure than whatever has existed so far. And the last thing is very specific to APAC, and it comes down with the diversity, the cultural aspects that is very diverse in APAC, is how you prepare for sovereignty in data. And there are two elements to it. One is about data residency, and the second is about data privacy as well. And we'll talk a bit of details of how these four need to go together, and these form the key pillars for any enterprise. If they're thinking about a cloud strategy or they're already in the cloud, they need to go back, rethink about the strategy. And this needs to be a dynamic pillar. It's not a one-time strategy where, okay, hey, I've decided these are the four pillars right now, and you don't need to continue. I need to continue the same way. They need to iterate at multiple intervals, and we'll talk about each one of them in detail. Moving on. So first, we want to address the biggest bottleneck in terms of how enterprises need to have a change in mindset. And moving on, can we move to the next one? So these are some interesting numbers we got out from both the global enterprises where we conducted over 450 interviews, and these are not survey numbers. These are direct interviews where we spoke to the CXOs, CTOs, the procurement heads. And these numbers are very interesting for me personally, given that North America, they're like more than 54% of them are like cloud is their strategic priority in the next 1 year, 1.5 years. We're not even talking about a 5-year time frame. But whereas when it comes to APAC, that drastically reduces in terms to 42%. And I was pondering over what could be those reasons, and 39% of them said it's primarily because they have a lot of technical debt and they're hesitant to move away from their legacy. And it's very interesting. Often the answer I get, hey, if you have technology debt, why don't you move to the cloud? Moving to cloud is the answer, but often the answer I get is, hey, it's working for me. It's a black box. I don't know how it's happening, but it's working well for me. All my operations are aligned to it, so I don't want to disturb that. And I feel that that's a very crucial mindset that needs to change for enterprises.
Yeah, I think something has to break big time in these companies. Otherwise, they won't learn. And it will happen sooner, actually.
Yeah. And that scaling inertia and hesitation, we can primarily drill down to 4 components. And we talked about the technology bottlenecks being your old legacy mainframes, monolithic architectures in place, but also some of the process and change management. And these are even bigger issues, in my opinion, rather than the technology in itself. The ways budgeting used to happen, the way the finance function operated with IT used to be very different. It used to be a 10-year or a 20-year picture where they used to invest in data center that's going to support me for the next 20, 30 years. So it's going to be a one-time investment. And after that, the finance guys will not make much of a deal, and they'll just talk about, hey, cut down the operating costs. Let's appreciate or depreciate the assets. And that's how it used to work. But in the cloud world, that process is not going to work. It needs to be a rethink of how you can make the finance processes as well dynamic, so that some of these pay-as-you-go models can be embedded into how your finance function operates as well. That seems to be a bigger challenge in APAC enterprises, because that needs a change management issue as well, where the workforce and the business teams need to align to new ways of working. There needs to be more conversations with the IT teams more regularly. Earlier, it used to be a yearly call. It needs to be now even bi-weekly. I see even weekly calls happening between the finance teams and IT teams. And obviously, there is a risk aversion mindset. Hey, if it's working for me, why do I have to take the risk of moving to the cloud? But that kind of stops you from getting the benefits that the business is going to get. And I want to quote an example here. One of the Southeast Asian companies that I was talking to a couple of weeks back, they were also sitting in a legacy estate, and they were using it. They had old SAP systems, CRM systems that they used for ordering and delivering food products. And that kind of was slowing down their operations. They were not able to deliver to the customers as fast as possible. And customers wanted it more fast. Hey, I'm ordering it, but it's getting delayed. And cloud kind of changed that. And we'll talk about some of the elements that help that company move to the next level. Can we move on to the next slide? And so there are 2 elements to how that company changed, and that's kind of fundamental to how APAC enterprises also need to think about their cloud strategy going forward from a technology or a legacy mindset thing is have a goal that is aligned to your business. Hey, I want to be, if you're a manufacturing customer, hey, I want to be a digital mobility company. If you're a bank, I want to become the digital bank for the entire Southeast Asian market. Hey, I want to become the digital provider for all things SaaS. So that digital-led outcome is going to be pivotal in terms of defining your cloud strategy. Once you have that in place, then you align your IT objectives to that business outcome, and then you start planning your cloud. And I think that is what is pivotal, and that's what the company I was talking to also helped them was. They wanted to give supreme customer experience, and they wanted to be very fast in terms of time to market. And that's how they started building their cloud strategy. Okay, this is what I need. Then I need a public cloud environment for all my customer facing applications so that I have faster time to market. And that also kind of alleviates some of the risk associated with it in terms of some of the challenges, because some of your business processes, because your operations were earlier tied to a slower time to market, now they need to be even faster. So first is about having a transformational approach that's tied to business. And the second is about aligning to 4 different business groups. And you might agree with me that someone like a super user, which are your developers, product heads, they kind of realize the benefit of cloud. But most often the budget controllers and the strategic decision makers keep getting left out of the conversation, and that is something that I'm seeing right now happening. All the CFOs are questioning, hey, you moved to cloud, you told me you're going to give me so many savings, but that's not happening. And that kind of a value is something I'm definitely seeing. Yugal, are you seeing something differently, or you're also seeing something similar?
So I think one very interesting solution I recently reviewed which was allowing developers to stress test how their architectural choices are impacting cloud costs. Which means, so to your point, Titus, what the developers or the tech team was thinking more from the tech perspective, whether it's good for the tech, the workload or use case that we are trying to do. What they weren't thinking, okay, how is this going to impact the budgeting cycle? So now some of the solutions are being built that are helping these super users, as we call them. No, okay, if you do these architectural choices, there are 3 architectural choices in front of you. If you take this route, or that route, the cost impact is this. And I think that's a very good solution. This takes cloud FinOps to a next level. So it's just not about operating cloud, but it is about while you are architecting for it, while you are designing for it, can the people know what is the cost impact of it? So cost is one part of it, because see, the productivity part, the agility part, the value part, the super users are going to take care because they have to build the workload. What they do not have a good view on is how is this going to impact my CFO and CEOs because of the cost impact. So some of those things are happening. I think this also tells us what we've been talking about, that increasingly the maturity and the thinking of APAC market has started to mimic what we see globally, which didn't used to happen earlier. And in some cases, it is becoming even more enhanced than some of their Western counterparts because of the unique needs of this region. So yes, all of these 4 will become are important. And I think it depends on which enterprise is going to use them, how they are making a pod, cloud adoption pod as a COEs or pods coming together to ensure that they are getting business value out of their cloud adoption and do not make cloud adoption in itself a business agenda. So that needs to be seen.
Yep. That's a very good point, Yugal. Like, cloud adoption should not be the business agenda, but how do you tie the other way around? Moving on. So now we also touched about cost, which I want to kind of expand, which is the second big pillar in terms of the strategy that enterprises need to think about. Let's move on. One more. So we also touched upon, Yugal was talking about FinOps in terms of how in the cloud, how do you operate and optimize your cloud adoption. But one of the major roadblocks, Yugal, we found out in terms of some of the interviews is that I don't have enough budget to move to the cloud. But I think that's a big misconstrued observation in terms of I don't need so much CapEx to move to the cloud. There might be some migration and modernization, but a lot of them can be split across here. There's a lot of financial engineering that can happen that you can alleviate some of these problems of moving to the cloud. Because if I talk to the global enterprises, the problem is more in the cloud, but in APAC still primarily we see the cost moving to the cloud is still a prevalent issue. And a lot of them are not thinking beyond the box of, hey, my CFO is not giving me budgets. you don't need a one-time budget to move to the cloud. There are multiple ways. And one of the things I wanted to talk about, Yugal, and wanted to take your opinion is how they're not working with partners enough. There are ISPs, there are cloud providers, there are professional services who are ready to support and help you move to the cloud through a lot of engineering. So can you just throw some light on that?
So I think one, this is a failure of the supply ecosystem and not the buy side. All the cool things they have done in Western markets, unfortunately, they are not doing in APAC. And one of the big reason is because of the heterogeneity of the market. So creating one go-to market, creating one financial commercial model is a challenge. But irrespective of it, right, you have to do something about it. APAC is such a big market in terms of business and technology. But unfortunately, both the cloud platform providers, the tech vendors, and the technology and consulting provider, they aren't seeing this market as strategically as they should. So if they do it, I believe this market can grow so much fast that it will leave a lot of the Western markets behind. So net of it, it is, in my mind, this is frankly less about the enterprises. This is more about the supply ecosystem. It's a failure of supply ecosystem who are not able to help enterprises bring these innovative commercial and consumption models to help them in their to the cloud journey.
Yeah, I agree with you because recently I was talking to a global healthcare company who wanted to move out of their data centers. And they asked a very simple question, which I've never usually gotten from some of the European or North America customers is, hey, what do I do with my existing data center? The likes of the hyperscalers, they used to proactively go and do some of the cost takeouts proactively, but that was not happening in the APAC market where they were proactively saying, hey, we'll take care of your data centers, don't worry too much about it. And in terms of moving on, in terms of cost management strategy, there needs to be 4 important things. One is getting the alignment right. And second is what we talked about in terms of mapping your objectives with the right partners. And obviously make sure you factor in whatever your regional requirements are, whatever sovereignty and compliance requirements. So if data residency is a thing, factor in the cost of having it in your private cloud or an on-prem. And the last is about in the cloud, how do you optimize it? And here is where FinOps is going to be an even bigger concept. We know FinOps has been there for a while, but it's still maturing and it's not a tool conversation. It has to be a approach between finance, business, and IT in terms of how they operationalize it overall, and just don't rely on tools, have set processes in place. Moving on. And the third is the biggest roadblock and in terms of security. And one of the things APAC enterprises have kind of talked about, in which we'll talk about in the next slide. Can we move on? Can we bring up the map as well? Okay. In terms of some of the top concerns, if you talk about APAC that they bring to the table in terms of, hey, is cloud really secure? Hey, I've seen a lot of data loss that's happening. There's a lot of breach, and any data breach is associated with a lot of compliance cost. There's a lot of reputational damage that's associated with it. And even one of the lot of misconstrued opinions from APAC enterprises that I keep seeing is, hey, I don't have ownership. Will it be really secure? I don't have visibility where my data resides, which data center is it in, who's going to be accountable for that. There is limited coverage. So a lot of really good questions come from APAC enterprises. But frankly, these are coming from a wrong angle in terms of whether cloud can they offer all of these? The simple answer is yes, and we'll see in the next slide. What enterprises need to rethink from an APAC point of view is cloud is not a security roadblock. There's no security roadblock associated with cloud, but actually cloud can be an enabler to improve your security posture. And we've seen that with multiple examples, even at the global level. There's a perception that it's insecure. There's a perception that I might not, there'll be a lot bigger potential for data breach. And they are coming from a right angle, given the number of data breaches that have been happening in the market. But that doesn't mean it's not happening elsewhere as well. It's not only a cloud conversation, but if done right, if people start with a secure by design approach to cloud, where the responsibilities are shared, you bring in your entire partner ecosystem into your secure by design approach, be it enterprises, the cloud providers, your professional services partners, and the implementation partners. If all of them are brought in with proper design by principles, including some of the technologies like SASE that's coming up, the security posture is actually way, way better than what it has used to be in the legacy estate, where the firewalls used to block everything from data center. And this is, this is something I've seen in one of the recent examples as well, where a global SI completely moved to a internet-based cloud strategy, where it's a public cloud first strategy. And they adopted SASE right from the beginning, and they designed the entire estate with SASE as a big theme. And apparently their security numbers, incident numbers, or even some of the SOC numbers that are coming in are at least 30-40% less compared to what it was before. And that was very fascinating in terms of how enterprises need to think cloud can enable to improve your security posture and not the other way around. And moving on, which brings to the last and the most important or a very unique point to APAC enterprises in itself is, we talked about how diverse the market is in terms of how there are different laws in different countries. There's a spectrum to it as well. Let's move on. And as there's also a maturity that's happening in terms of these different laws, in terms of where the data is going to reside. And we see that change in three ways. When you look at countries like China, Indonesia, they already have a strong data protection law in place and people have to comply by it. Whereas in countries like Vietnam, India, Singapore, we are expecting them to launch soon, and there are already things in place in terms of what we can expect out of it. Whereas some of the mature markets like ANZ, Japan, they have cross-country data sharing, partial laws that allow you to post your data in certain regions, but not in the others. So there's an entire spectrum and diversity to how data regulations are there. And there are two factors to it. One is obviously where the data resides, but there's also a data privacy angle to it as well, in terms of whose data is there. Are you putting user data here? Do you have a data protection officer? Do you have a breach notification in place? So these two is very unique to how APAC operates compared to the sovereignty requirements in Europe. And we are seeing some of the suppliers already starting to plan accordingly in terms of setting up data centers locally so that the data residencies are there. And we are seeing increased partnerships with regional providers. So someone like China, the Alibaba and the Tencent clouds are doing really well in terms of building that ecosystem. And we see a partnership evolving from a supply point of view. But what is lacking, which we will talk about in the next slide, is that right now enterprises see data sovereignty as a regulatory compliance enabler. But that needs to be changed. In fact, it can be an enabler much beyond just complying your regulatory requirements. It can be what pivots your data security landscape in itself. It can enable a strong data security posture by having this data sovereignty principles from a holistic lens. So it can provide you regulatory compliance, it can provide you privacy, security, it can improve your availability. Some of your use cases that have low latency requirements, once you have residing it closer to you, so you can improve some of your businesses as well. And that is something I don't see enterprises proactively thinking about it. They still see data sovereignty as, hey, I have to comply with my regulations in my country, but that needs to change. And that's something we need to change big time in the APAC enterprises, in terms of, you see it from a business lens. You identify your objectives, tie it back to business, embed some of the principles of, hey, these data need to be here. And how can I maximize the value out of it, in terms of, if this data is there, can I use it to optimize some of my business processes? So some of that is still lacking in APAC enterprises, and that needs to change. Now, just want to take a minute to summarize what we have talked about in terms of what are the 4 key pillars of, can we move on? When we talk about the 4 key pillars in terms of how enterprises need to rethink this strategy, can we move on? One more slide. Now, what we all know is how diverse the market is, how resilient and unique the market is in terms of APAC cloud services. But if I have to leave out 4 things for both enterprises, cloud providers, service providers that are serving this market, focus on having an outcome that is tied to business, leave out your legacy mindset, plan for both your costs that is going to the cloud and in the cloud. And in terms of security, start with security. Design needs to start with security as your fundamental core, and everything else will follow. And take a holistic lens in terms of how you can maximize value out of whatever data sovereignty and unique cultural and regulatory or regional nuances that come into place. Take that into consideration and maximize value out of it. So these are the 4 key takeaways in terms of what we wanted to give from this webinar. And we are open to questions if team have, and Yugal, if there are any closing comments, if you have.
So I think let's just take the question that we got, earlier when we were launching the webinar. If you move on, first of all, of course, once we will come to the Q&A, but we are offering the enterprises within APAC a session with our subject matter experts in cloud services to discuss your cloud transformation journey. There is a link in the chat where we have put our CTA offer, our call to action offer. So please feel free to go register there and then download it. Now, from a service provider point of view, a lot of service providers have burned their hand in the APAC market, probably not have seen as much success as they would want given the nature of the market. So we will be happy to speak with you and then see where Everest Group can help, and then understand your capabilities as well. And then session on beyond cloud as well, right? Taking the entire digital transformation possibility, which is there, leveraging cloud as an operating model, or benchmarking you against your nearest peer, how you are doing, how they are deriving value out of cloud, how they are doing data management on cloud. So variety of those things. But Titus, to your point around questions, right? Let me throw some question that we got during our the launch. So one is in the APAC market side, right? And as we talked about so much of heterogeneity of this market, on a scale of 1 to 10, if you compare the way at least the supply side behaves and works in this market vis-a-vis some of their more homogeneous market, bigger market, how would you rate their effort first of all? Do they really put that much effort, or still consider it to be as a secondary option?
I still feel it's a secondary option. There is some evidence that they're moving in terms of putting it as a primary objective, but I still feel like it's way behind what they kind of focus on in other markets, the kind of investments they make, the kind of strategic priority that's emphasized. I see a lot of CEO to CEO conversations happening a lot in North America and Europe. I don't see the same amount of effort from the CEOs of the hyperscalers or some of the product vendors that's happening in APAC market. And I would put somewhere around earlier, a couple of years back, it was 3, it's maybe up to 5 or 6 now, but still there's a long way to go.
Interesting. And last, and I know we are at the top of the hour, but it has been a very interesting discussion about this market, which is probably not as well served as some of the others. One other question that we got was around, okay, from a buy side perspective, right? All of them have invested in cloud. All of them have done, as I was talking about to the CTO, that we were focusing how they can use this 3 tower value of cloud, data, AI, of course, cloud, data, AI, and then platforms, how they bring these together to create business value. What's the take on it?
Yeah, so I would actually de-link cloud from data AI platform. Actually, cloud will be the underlying platform on top of which my data AI application and platform sits on top of cloud. Your cloud needs to be your layer of bringing together all these fundamental elements together. And people need to think cloud as a platform in itself to build your business. Only then we'll start seeing the greater benefits of data, AI, even some of the IoT and edge technologies. And cloud is going to be that base on which everything's going to be built on. And I wouldn't put cloud next to data. It's going to be below, a layer below that. It's going to be your core at which businesses are going to operate. Your IT is going to operate. And with that in place, earlier we used to have this dealing that your IT stacks and your business layers were 90 degrees to each other. They were not aligned. But if you start building from a cloud platform where data, AI, IoT, all of these resides on top of cloud, that alignment can be made directly to the business and the IT stacks can be broken up.
Okay. So thank you very much all for joining this session. We hope that you got something out of it, and the recording of this will be live soon, and we look forward to engaging with you again. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.